If you have ever wondered what it would be like to paddle the remote eastern shore of Lake Superior, then you've come to the right video. I spent about a month during the summer of 2023 exploring the northeast coast of Lake Superior by kayak, camping out every night. And here's what it was like. I went to the northeastern coast of Lake Superior because it's remote with very few visitors. It's public land where camping is allowed. There's no bugs. There's no portaging or dragging your boat and stuff overland between bodies of water. And there's no rapids. My plan was to take about a month to paddle from Michipicoten to Hattie Cove, resupply, and then return to Michipicoten. Superior is a big lake. At 82,000 square kilometers of surface area, it's the world's largest freshwater lake, and it contains 10% of the Earth's fresh surface water. This was going to be a solo trip with all the accompanying dangers. I knew Superior is a big lake, but I had experienced paddling for 2 months in the Inland Passage in British Columbia. So I figured by comparison to the Pacific Ocean, this trip would be a leisurely paddle on a calm mill pond. However, I was in for a big surprise. I made final trip preparations and launched from the Naturally Superior Adventures Paddling Center in Michipicoten. They provided a wealth of paddling and camping knowledge and a place to park my car while on the trip. The night before my first day of paddling, Superior showed me what she can do. This photo shows the size of waves that the lake kicked up. Despite all my experience paddling on the Pacific, this scared me. I can't stay upright in waves like these. And if I was knocked over, there's a good chance I would die of hypothermia before I could right the boat. In these conditions, I cannot be on the water. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. But the next morning, the lake had calmed a bit, and with some trepidation, I launched into the adventure. It was my first lesson in how fast weather conditions can change on the lake. There are many lighthouses on Lake Superior. My first stop was at the Perkwakwia Point Lighthouse. I landed on the rescue boat ramp and poked around the boathouse first. Light automation has resulted in abandoning the lighthouse quarters, but they were really interesting to explore, if a little creepy. It's the end of my second day on the water, and both days have been as beautiful as the 2 days before I launched were scary and horrible. Beginning to think that maybe the muses aren't luring me out to my doom after all. This is where I'm going to be camping tonight. It's predicted to be another beautiful day tomorrow. So I think I'm going to take another short paddle down to a campsite where there is a place where I can do a hike up to a waterfall, either tomorrow or the next day, depending on what the weather is. Then I'll see what kind of weather forecast I can get and make a decision about what to do at that point. Last night I had a major equipment problem. While I was off cooking dinner, my forward waterproof hatch cover vanished. I have no idea what happened to it. My best guess is that the fox that I saw checking out my camp came down, smelled food on it, grabbed it, and ran off. I thoroughly scoured the camp several times and could find no trace of it. This is a really big problem because if I can't secure that forward hatch, I'm going to have to abort the trip and get back to launch as fast as I can, because you can't paddle with a flooded forward compartment. My kayak has 2 hatch covers, an inner waterproof neoprene cover and an outer hard plastic cover to keep the inner cover from coming loose. It was the inner hatch cover that disappeared. After another sleepless night of thinking of fixes, I devised this solution. I used a new garbage bag to replace the neoprene cover and an elastic cord to hold the garbage bag in place. Looking at it, I wouldn't have bet it would last the rest of the day, let alone another 4 weeks. But it did. Without much faith in my hatch fix, I decided to keep going. That day I paddled to the mouth of the Dog River. I've got a lot of free time on this trip built in so that I can stay on shore for a couple of days at a time and not paddle if the weather gets really bad. Weather's not bad today, but it is supposed to rain this evening, and I've got a lovely glam spot with my tarp up. So I think I'm going to stay here today and spend the day, if I can, hike up this river to Denison Falls. A couple of folks last night took a crack at it, and they got as far, I guess about a quarter mile up the river to a fish camp where they lost the trail. So I thought I would see if I can pick it up and find the falls. Made it as far as the fish camp that the other folks told me about last night. They got stuck here and couldn't find the trail, and I see why. There's not much of anything indicating a trail that I can see here. So I think what I'm going to do is go down to the river, follow the riverbed upstream, and see if I can pick up the trail. Because after all, the waterfall is upstream. After following the riverbank for about 20 yards, I bushwhacked uphill and discovered the trail. It was a little rough, but an interesting walk. Lake Superior was scooped out by glaciers as they expanded during the Ice Age. As the climate warmed and the glaciers melted and retreated, they deposited the rock and debris they picked up as they had expanded, which is what you see here. Looks like I have successfully followed the trail, such as it is, scrambled and bushwhacked my way to the lower falls. According to the map, there are upper falls, which are even prettier than these ones. I've heard it involves climbing hand over hand up a rope, so I'm going to poke around, see if I can pick up the trail again and find the upper falls. Yep, to continue on to the upper falls, you gotta scale a rope ladder. Faced with a situation like this, alone and far from help, I always ask myself, am I thinking about doing something stupid? I weighed the risks, evaluated the condition of the rope, and decided to go for it. Yeah, baby! Made it to the fabled Upper Falls. See a little bit of mist up in the top left up there, so there may be some more, but I think I've pressed my luck enough for one day. Not too shabby for the end of a hike. I turned around from making this video and I almost stepped on this guy. I have a visceral fear of snakes and I almost fell off the cliff jumping back from this one. And all the way back to camp, I saw a snake in every stick lying across the trail. It didn't rain that night, but the next morning dawned foggy. Challenge of the day is paddling in the fog. The reason I'm going to take a crack at this is because I need to pass 2 miles of headlands that are all cliffs, no place to land. The fog makes the water generally nice and flat. There's no wind, so I can make a lot of time and I won't have to worry about getting bashed against the cliffs by the waves. The challenge to getting past the cliffs, obviously, is going to be the fog. Maps are not a whole lot of help to me in this kind of weather because one point starts to look like another in the fog, so it's hard to tell exactly where I am. I'm going to be relying primarily on my GPS devices. I have 3 of them, so lots of redundancy. If at any time I feel uncomfortable, I'm going to turn around, come back here, or duck into a cove and set up somewhere, wait for the fog to lift. So let's see what happens. Sticking close to the shoreline, I made it past the cliffs safely in the fog. Just as I passed the cliffs, the fog burned off and it turned into a beautiful day. As I paddled along the shoreline, I was struck by how much it resembles the coast of Maine. Mostly rocks dropping straight into the water, with no good places to land a kayak. Sometimes I had to taste the water to remind myself I was not back on the Atlantic. Nope, still not salty. There are a lot of beaches scattered along the shoreline of Lake Superior. Some of them are quite large and make great places to land. That is, as long as there's no surf. Waves big enough to turn my boat sideways and roll me like a log in the surf, beating up my boat and my body, can develop from a calm sea like this to one creating dangerous landing conditions in less than an hour. Thus, as when I was flying hang gliders, I always needed to be aware of a close place to land in case the conditions on the lake started to get ugly. And sometimes that even happened while I was on land. Conditions can change really fast around here. I stopped into this cove for lunch, and over the course of about 45 minutes, the wind picked up substantially. So I had to ask myself, would it be stupid to go out in freshening wind and whitecaps if I don't have to? Probably would. So I think I'll stay here tonight. On days when I wasn't marooned on a beach, I would sometimes explore up some of the rivers and creeks that flowed into the lake. Sometimes they were dead ends, but other times I saw beautiful flora and sometimes fauna, or at least evidence of it, like this beaver lodge. And if I was really lucky, I might find a warm pool where I could take a bath without freezing in the process. Unlike my trip to British Columbia, I did not see any animals, only evidence of them, like the beaver lodge and tracks like these in the sand. The only animal I actually saw was a fox like this one, snooping around my boat the night my hatch cover disappeared. On my paddle north, something I did see was Michipicoten Island just offshore. It looks so accessible and tempting in good weather. Off in the distance there, you can just see mysterious Michipicoten Island, reputed to be inhabited by devils and evil spirits. Most of it is a provincial park now, so I could paddle over there and find some places to camp. It's about 10 miles offshore and the sirens are calling me. But I gotta ask myself, would paddling over there by myself without a long-range weather forecast be a stupid idea? Yeah, probably would. So I think I'm going to play it safe and skip paddling over there. But it sure looks interesting. Just when I was feeling good about being smart in the wilderness, another potential disaster struck. My water filter failed. Challenge for the day is to fix the filtration system. I'm about 4 days out from Hattie Cove and have got a gallon of pure water left. And unless I can fix my filtration system, I am going to have to drink straight out of the lake, which is not horrible if I'm careful, but it's ill-advised. Essentially, the problem is that the ball valve at the base of the large water collection valve that feeds water into a very small tube that goes into the filter is blocked. And unless I can figure out some way to fix that valve, I have no way of funneling water into the filter system. I initially tried to solve the problem by creating gaskets out of duct tape that would push the ball forwards in the valve and allow water to flow through it. But ultimately this never worked. Finally, in desperation, I cut the connector off the tube running to the water filter, then stuck the tube through a hole I cut in the bottom of one of my trusty Ziploc bags. Thus, I completely eliminated the valve problem. I used lots of duct tape to seal where the tube entered the bag, and voila, another kludgy wilderness fix. I lost about 25% of the water in the bag through the duct tape seal, but it worked well enough to get me to Hattie Cove, where I hoped I could find a replacement. I didn't meet many people out there, but I did meet this gentleman who was a real inspiration to me. He has a few years on me, but he was out for 5 straight weeks in a canoe. He carried everything he needed for the entire trip in that boat, no resupply. He invited me over to a delicious tortellini dinner with marinara sauce and fresh garlic and Parmesan cheese, which was much better than anything I was eating. I hope I can stay as adventurous as he is as I get older. Several days later, I paddled into the Hattie Cove campground at the north edge of the Pecoscoa National Park. This was my halfway, provisioning, and turnaround point, and I arrived just before several days of forecasted rain. When I landed, the Stuhlens, a lovely Canadian couple, wandered over and started a conversation with me that turned into dinner invitations and a ride into Marathon where I could resupply. They also introduced me to Timmy Hortons, where I got real coffee for the first time in weeks, and an apple fritter, which is my favorite. I can't thank them and the incredibly helpful staff at the Hattie Cove campground enough. Without them, resupply and refitting would have been much more difficult. After spending my first rainy day at Hattie Cove resupplying in Marathon, I decided to spend the next drizzly day hiking several miles along the beginning of the coast trail to this fabled suspension bridge, which graces many Pecoscoa National Park t-shirts and stickers. Today I'm in the Pecoscoa National Park in Ontario, and I'm going to take a crack at hiking out to the fabled suspension bridge on the coastal trail. We've had some rain the last couple of days. The trails are a little sloppy, and I only have my Crocs to hike in. Not an optimal set of gear, but yeah, you got to go with what you got. And that's all I have. So we'll see how far I got. And voila, here we are at the much storied suspension bridge over the White River along the coastal trail in Pecoscoa National Park, Ontario. This is why it was worth the 2-hour walk. Pretty cool. If you are very observant, you might have noticed the bow of a blue kayak wedged between some rocks downstream of the bridge. Seeing that convinced me to stick to sea kayaking. The day had cleared by the time I hiked back to the campground, so I decided to take another hike out to the coast and take a look at the conditions on the lake. It was an interesting walk with a beautiful viewpoint at the end. But once again, the wind had whipped Superior into conditions that were beyond my paddling skill level and thus dangerous. It made me wonder, would it be doing something stupid to go back out into those conditions for another 2 weeks? Or should I be safe, call it a trip, and head home? The conditions may not look bad on this video, but notice how much the wind bends the trees and the size of the surf on the rocks. My greatest concern was my inability to get accurate weather forecasts. I could not get a marine weather forecast on the marine radio because the towers were down. So I was reduced to watching changes in the sky, sea, and wind, and getting very general area forecasts on my Garmin InReach. Given the speed with which conditions change on the water, neither of these methods made me feel very comfortable. After another restless night, I decided to continue with the trip. Again, it was with a bit of trepidation that I left my comfortable campsite and meals with the Stuhlens to head back out onto the lake. On the first leg of the paddle, I marked good landing and campsites along the shore, which gave me some hope that finding a campsite on the return paddle would be a little easier. In order to find a campsite, I first needed to find a place to land. Then, once ashore, find a clearing in the thick underbrush big enough for a tent. People often camp on the sandy beaches, but these spots are exposed to very strong winds, and sand, which is very abrasive, gets into everything and grinds up your gear over time. I much preferred a spot off the beach and in the trees, optimally one where I could suspend my tent off the ground and then suspend a tarp over the tent if rain threatened. The payoff was a lovely, secluded spot all to myself. I was also often rewarded with a beautiful sunset or reflections on a calm lake or cove. And sometimes, if I could stay up long enough, I could watch the moon rise over the water. In the past, the eastern shore of Lake Superior was much busier than it is today. Although I did not see a person, boat, or aircraft the entire second half of my trip, the coast I paddled past was once logged and homesteaded, and I did see a few remnants of human habitation along the shore. The Pecasqua Depot here on Imogene Cove was once a busy base for logging operations. There was a bunkhouse, doctor's house, blacksmith shop, cookhouse, warehouse, stables, and a sawmill. The logging operation was abandoned in 1930, and the site is now oddly marked on the shore by these chairs. The only remains of this once busy logging operation are these strangely open areas, which are very out of place in the thick surrounding forest. I also saw one tumble-down structure and a few rusting artifacts. It was a little unsettling to wander around this site, like being in a busy office after hours when there's no one else around. On the paddle south, I took some time to search for Pecasqua pits. Before Europeans began moving into Ontario, the Ojibwe lived here, and they left these enigmatic pits along the shore. I am about to land and search for a Pecasqua pit. These pits were made by the Ojibwe. Nobody really knows quite what for. There's the ubiquitous ritual use guess. Other people have theorized that they're made for shelter. But from what I understand, they are just depressions or pits in the ground, sometimes surrounded by walls. And they're up on these high midden beaches. So apparently these were created when the beaches were created when the water level of the lake was much higher. So they're supposedly all along the coast here. This is I've heard that there's one here, so I'm going to go in and check it out, see what I find. I found several pits at several locations along the shore. They were all up on the highest level of terraced rocky beaches. Most were about 6 feet in diameter, others a bit smaller, and all of them were less than 2 feet deep. Some were round, some were oval. Some stood alone, others in small clusters of 2 or 3. Some had small walls facing the lake and the prevailing wind, which could have been windshields. Others did not have any walls at all. After seeing several of these pit sites, I can't imagine what they might have been used for. They're located on beaches with challenging landings, so access to them is much more difficult than it would have been if they were located on a sand beach. They're up on the top of beach bluffs, exposed to constant wind, despite more sheltered sites behind trees on the same beach. However, the exposed location would make fires in them easily visible from offshore. And finally, they did not seem to be big enough to be useful shelter foundations. So why would you build a shelter or a fire pit in a place that is hard to access and exposed to the elements? The fact that they do not seem to make sense as shelters or fire pits, and the lack of another logical explanation, makes me think that maybe they were used for ritual purposes, although that still seems to be the intellectually easy way out of this puzzle. I made another stop on Otter Island. According to the Canadian government, this is one of the most remote shorelines anywhere on the Great Lakes. Otter Island is the site of the Otter Island Light Station, now another automated light with abandoned lightkeeper quarters and lighthouse. Apparently, it is also the site visited by Glenn in 1917. I landed at the cove at the lightkeeper's house and walked an old, overgrown path through the woods to the lighthouse on the other side of the island. I love the beaver weather vane on the top of this lighthouse. Although there is a new equipment storage shed at the lighthouse site, there's still quite a bit of really cool old infrastructure left around the lighthouse. I met this group of Canadian scientists who are calibrating instruments that measure lake water level and track changes in the levels over time. They were really friendly, and they explained how their equipment works to me, but I didn't really understand it. They also told me that the marine weather repeater was down, which is why I had not been able to get a weather forecast on my marine radio for weeks. Not having a good marine forecast made me really nervous. As I've mentioned several times, the weather on Lake Superior can change fast, and for me, can make being out on the water suddenly dangerous. On the return trip, the wind frequently blew from astern or behind me, making it harder to notice as the wind and waves increased. Twice on the way back, the conditions built faster than I could find a place to land, and the paddling got scary. Man, I just dodged the bullet on this one. The morning started off nice, but the wind has been building, and now about 2 o'clock, it's about 20 knots, which is at the edge of my skill ability. I was out there paddling really hard just to stay upright. If I hadn't found this cove and was out there, I probably would be in the water right now. So I think I'm going to finish my day here. There's a nice sheltered spot in the cove where I'll put out my tent, and perhaps I will do a little river exploration where it's out of the wind and a little safer and warmer. By the evening, the winds had quieted down. After almost a month on the lake, I decided I was ready to head home. I was never really comfortable when on the water. That fear of being caught out in dangerous conditions was always nagging at me. While it kept me vigilant and safe, I was never really comfortable. The decision to head home was reinforced that night when a friend alerted me by satellite message that a long period of bad weather was heading my way. The next morning, I started focusing on getting back to Michipicoten as fast as possible. These last couple of days of the trip have turned into a race of sorts against time. I need to be off the water by Sunday, noontime. The winds are forecast to pick up to about 20 knots, which is vastly beyond my ability to paddle in. And the next week or so after that is forecast to be pretty crummy. So if I don't get in by Sunday, noontime, I may be stuck out here for a while. Today is Friday. I've got about 26 miles to go, which isn't too bad. I mean, in a nice day, I could paddle that easily. But the weather is conspiring against me. Yesterday, Friday, I was kicked off the water by high winds and big waves. And today was only able to get about 11 miles in before I hit Point Issacore, which is the beginning of about 4 miles of cliffs where there is nowhere to land, and the wind is forecast to pick up to about 20 knots again this afternoon. So I'm not going to risk going any farther today. So even though it's only about noontime, I'm off the water and stuck on this beautiful beach. Yeah, I know, it's retired people problems. But at the same time, I really need to get some miles in. So the plan is to get up really early tomorrow morning, get on the water, paddle as far as I can, and hopefully make for a very short day on Sunday. It's Saturday about 1 o'clock, and best I can tell, I'm about halfway back to Michipicoton and my car. I woke up this morning and listened to the weather report, which says light variable winds today, building to 10 knots tonight, and then 20 tomorrow with a severe wind warning. So I am paddling hard to get back to the car tonight, if that's at all possible. 50-50 at this point to see if I'll make it or not. Broken into the hard stuff, started taking ibuprofen and caffeinated energy goo, seeing if I can squeeze as much as possible out of this old body and make as many miles as fast as I can. Stopped in here for lunch at the site of the loss of my hatch cover, and still nothing here. So I'm gonna hit the water again and see how far I can make it. 4:30 Saturday afternoon. I made it. 27 miles, 8.5 hours paddling. That's a half an hour for lunch. I'm in Michipicoton Harbor at Naturally Superior Adventures, and I beat the storm in. It's building out there. The last hour was tough. Big building following waves with white caps, but I managed to get in, and it feels good. It feels really good. Thank God. Well, it looked like the storm was building yesterday, but my first day back dawned calm and clear. The forecasted storm never materialized. Just goes to show you never know what you're going to get on Lake Superior. Planning for this trip, I thought after paddling for 2 months in British Columbia that this trip would be a leisurely, almost boring paddle on a calm mill pond. Just goes to show you never know what you're going to get on Lake Superior. So that's what it was like for me to paddle for a month on remote Lake Superior. I saw much beauty, felt some fear, and got closer to God as I understand Him. I hope watching this video encourages you to get out there too, be it to do a paddle, ride a bike, take a hike, or just work in the garden. Outside is beautiful. Get out there. And for anyone interested in planning a trip to this area, these are some resources that I found invaluable. Thanks for watching.